Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Dr. Melvin Morse. And Melvin, do you want to give us your background?
Sure. Peggy, I'm a former critical care physician. So, boy, I've come a long journey from being a critical care doc to study. Um, but,
To what? It didn't pick up. I don't know.
uh,
Critical care
I
doc
was
to
a critical care doctor and I'm now studying mediumship.
mediumship. Okay, it didn't pick up that word. It just
Yeah.
went blank. Okay.
So, it's been quite a journey for me. um, but it's a logical journey. It makes sense. And it's been a scientific journey. I have gone where the scientific evidence has led me. And it's led me from the near death experiences of children
Yeah.
to studying remote viewing to developing my own form of remote viewing called spiritual sight. And then recently, we won a major grant to study mediumship. So
And that was
it's
from the
been
Bigelow Institute?
that's the Bigelow Institute. Yeah. Um, Mr. Bigelow and his organization, the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, um, he put $1 million into uh, tasking 6 scientific teams to research mediumship. And we were fortunate enough to be one of them. Um, Over 400 people applied.
Mhm.
So, I felt honored that we were chosen. My group is called the Institute for the Scientific Study of Consciousness. And our organization was actually founded by Charles Tart, who is the acknowledged father of our grandfather, really, of modern consciousness research. So we have a long pedigree, and we've studied a number of different aspects of consciousness. But
I
it all
know,
started,
I know
go
Mr.
on.
Bigelow a few years back did a big study like that too, with a lot of money awards behind it on near-death experiences. But now it's
Exactly.
mediumship.
Yeah.
And my understanding is he's looking for some answers of
And
the
then I
spirit
think he's,
world.
uh, and we got answers. So, we can get into that. But that's right. Um, his first, well, I worked for him when he had an organization called the National Institute of Discovery Science. And so that was a group of scientists that we looked at a lot of different types of consciousness projects. But the most famous thing that came out of that was his investigations of the Skinwalker Ranch. And I think it's reasonable to say that Mr. Bigelow is the first person who has truly documented that we have. Um, I can't say it's a UFO, but we've been contacted, uh, as the evidence at the Skinwalker Ranch shows, by some sort of entities. Maybe they're interdimensional, um, spiritual. I don't think that any of it, but it is clear that it's something that we can't possibly.
And I know that a lot of Christians, including me, there's an echo again, are scared off by the word medium. We've been conditioned to believe, witchcraft and those kind of things, but it's not necessary. It could be, but when you look at the whole picture of what's going on and our near-death experiences and the gifts that we come back with, some psychic abilities, then you've got to kind of wonder what's out there, not just the UFO sense that some do, because it seems like they're on opposite sides. The UFO people, the religious people, it seems like they're different sides, but if you open up and just like, okay, let's just look at it all. throw it out there on the table and look at all these things. And because we're just starting to scratch the surface, aren't we? I think. And seriously, okay, what is happening?
Well, first, I want to address your question about mediumship. It's very unfortunate, Peggy, that we have all these different labels. And so we label one thing a medium. But what's different? What's the difference between a medium and someone who contacts their guardian angel, or someone who God speaks directly to them? It's all the same process. It's the process of our mind, our conscious being, contacting some consciousness that exists beyond our mind. And there's been so much fear about it. And there's so much, our own anxieties, I think, get projected onto the process. But I want to get right to the point then,
Okay.
because it addresses your question. So, Mr. Bigelow, he had 4 questions that he wanted us to ask the spirit world. And one of the questions was, what has the spirit world done for humanity? The first question reflected on that we don't seem to be making much spiritual progress, and the war is awash. The world is awash with wars and the horrors of Gaza and the threat of nuclear war, and chemical weapons. I mean, it's truly frightening. So the first question was, has mankind failed to make any spiritual progress? And the second question was, what exactly has the spirit world done for us? And the first answer that came back was the 10 Commandments. So that addresses your issue directly because, this is a medium that we're working with. And yet, the first issue from the spirit world to remind humanity of what they have done for us, the very first piece of evidence that they presented was the 10 Commandments.
Mhm.
And and I think that we label everything into New Age Christians and evangelical, and but we forget that the 10 Commandments were in fact a spiritual communication with specific and spiritual instructions for humanity.
And they
And it
work.
could be argued,
I mean, they're rules to live by.
absolutely.
They work for everyone.
Yeah. So I think I'm very fortunate the way our society is, put all these things into different boxes. And I know that, so-called liberals get upset when they hear that people in Alabama want the 10 Commandments, in every school, and that those kinds of things divide us. And yet, in our study, the first thing the spiritual world wanted to remind us is that there is no difference between religion and what we're calling contact with the spiritual world.
Yeah.
That we have to stop with these labels and start embracing that there is a spiritual world that surrounds us that is greater than us, and we can't project our fears onto it.
Yeah. And so many of us NDEers come back with this feeling that we're afraid to tell anybody about our NDE because of our religions, our faith, or our family and friends' religions and faith that we know goes against it. But how do you tell somebody something that's so profound that happened to you, so earth-shattering? And, a lot of us kept it quiet for decades because, my grandma said this. My grandma, she's the one that took me to church, that this can't be, this isn't right. This isn't what the Bible taught. But then you get to a point, as you get older, wiser. I love the people that just come right out of the gate and say, "Hey, this happened," especially the little ones, that don't hesitate. But it shatters our own thinking.
I've been studying near-death experiences and our contact with the spiritual world, because that's all this near-death experience is. It's just another way of contacting the spiritual world. I've been studying it for 40 years, and I'm glad that you brought up you did, Peggy, because I think people forget that 40 years ago, people who had near-death experiences were considered to be crazy. They were, and they were ridiculed. Often their own physicians ridiculed them. I have to tell you, I got the very first child. I resuscitated this young girl, Crystal, and she was documented to be underwater in a swimming pool for 20 minutes. And I have to admit, I was no different when when she told me of her experience and visiting the Heavenly Father. And and well, I had to believe her because she accurately described every single thing that we did to her in the operating room and the emergency room. And yet that was a time where we knew she was clinically dead. But Peggy, I kind of laughed because I'd never heard of this sort of thing before. I trained at Johns Hopkins. We didn't, we I learned when you're dead, you're dead. And so I kind of chuckled, and she looks over at me and she pats my wrist and she said, "You'll see, Dr. Morse. Heaven is fun."
You know what's
So,
funny? What
yeah,
you and I connection we have is a year after my second NDE. That NDE, the tubal pregnancy, was in '85, and I think it was about a year after that that I saw that crystal on Oprah,
oh
and
yeah, that's it.
I had walked through my living room, and Oprah was new at the time. I wasn't real sure, we were used to Phil Donahue. And so Oprah was on, and there's Crystal and some other people, and they were saying these things. And I stood back and rolled my eyes because I had put away my NDE after I lost twins with it. It was traumatic, and I put it away and I couldn't talk about it. And so I watched this and I stepped back, I rolled my eyes, and I said, "Oh my God, how stupid do they think people are? Oh my God, this is ridiculous." I took a step back and something hit me. Something was like it was right in front of me. I'm like, "Oh my God, it was real. What happened to me at the hospital? I was in the wheelchair when I lost the twins. Oh my God, it was real." And this other voice in me was like, "No, it couldn't have been." I'm like, "Yes, it was. It was real." No. And there was this loud dialogue. It felt like I was losing my mind. And I was like, it was real. So I went in, continued to the kitchen where I was headed. I made dinner. My husband come home. And after dinner, I told the kids, "Go in your room, shut the door, and talk to your dad." And I sat him down and I told him my NDE. I lost the twins. And he looked at me, he said, "I know how it sounds, but I know you. And now you're telling me the truth."
Oh,
But
what a
so
great
it's thanks to
husband.
you because of Crystal that I had my aha moment that my NDE comes to surface.
Well,
I
thank you
didn't
very
catch the
much.
word
It means a lot to me.
I didn't catch the word near death experience on there. I don't know if it was the word or, they just were telling these stories. And so I thought later, I don't even have a name for this to go to the library and look it up. And so I just told a few people and then I left it alone for a long, long time.
And what gave you the courage to come back to it?
I was upstairs. It was probably 20 years later, 25, 35, 45, probably 20 years later. I was upstairs in my bedroom cleaning and I had the radio on and the Christian music just overtook me. And I sat on my bed and I just started crying. I'm like, the spiritual things that I had pushed away all my life started coming to a head. And I just started rejoicing God that these things, I had shoved them away. And I went down and got my adopted kids and put up the bedroom. And I'm crying and tell them, they're like, "Mom," because they never heard me talk like this. And so I got them in church and got them baptized. And, I talked a little here and there to my husband. And then when we got the internet, I thought, okay, how do I use this thing? What do I want to search? And I thought, well, that word near death experience, that's the only thing I can think of I want to. And so I typed in, and there was Near Death Experience Research Foundation, Jeffrey Long's website. And I typed that story
Oh,
in as
yeah.
fast as I could. I thought, there, I did it. Like, God, I did it. I honored him by sharing. I thought that would be the end of it. Of course, that was just the beginning. But yeah, that crystal was the first time that I come to know. And I didn't make the connection with you and her till just a couple years ago.
Interesting. Well, I'm struck by what you kept saying again and again, was it real? And that has been what has motivated me to go from critical care physician, to then, studying, something as way out as mediumship. Because I've always questioned, is the near death experience real? And I have to tell you a funny story about it. Um, we resuscitated this young man. He was underwater for 45 minutes. It was in the middle of winter. It was very snowy. And, as critical care physicians say, you're not dead till you're warm and dead. So we were able to warm him up, and he did survive. And he told me about that he went to heaven. And he said, I went to heaven and I traveled in a huge noodle. And then he said, no, no, no. It couldn't have been a noodle because noodles don't have rainbows in them.
Mm.
And, so that type of, I could see his thought process. I knew he was sincere. He obviously wasn't making this up. He was trying to make sense of something powerful that happened to him. And then he looks at me and he goes, but was it real, Dr. Morse? Because if it's real, you've got to tell all the old people. And, so here's, again, just to skip to the end real quick, spoiler alert. Our research at Seattle Children's Hospital and the University of Washington, we showed the doubt that near death experiences are in fact real. We showed that they're not caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain. They're not caused by drugs. They're not a hallucination at the point of death, but they're a very real experience that we will all have when we die. It's, in fact, the dying experience. And it's, from ridiculing people that had near death experiences, and even today on Facebook, I was like, that can't be true, has neurochemicals in the brain, and blah, blah, blah. We have to stop all that and start to learn from people who've had near death experiences. And in my study of mediums, we got the exact same message that I've heard from children who have near death experiences. And that is that this reality is a school and that we're here to learn lessons of love. And they are very highly specific lessons of love. They're, people struggle with that issue. Why do bad things happen to good people? And I've been so good my whole life. So why did this terrible thing happen to me? Why did this happen to your husband?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is clear because these are our lessons. These are our opportunities to learn. And you know what they say, getting old is not for sissies.
Right.
I mean, these are often brutal lessons. And they're only lessons that you can learn by actually living and going through suffering and, having terrible things happen to you and knowing, how do you reject bitterness? How do you still find your faith in God, even though something bad has happened? And those are the types of lessons that you need to learn, that we're here on this earth to learn. And it's a
Well, for
very
my
real
husband,
experience.
I just keep hearing thy will be done. Like this is
Yeah,
in God's hands.
right.
So, you know, he's my father. I
Learning to
respect my father.
submit,
So,
learning to have faith, learning to have blind faith
mhm.
is an important lesson. And yet, the other thing we know from the near death experience is when it's over, we get a big hug from God. That loving light. One of the most powerful near death experiences uh, that I've ever had is from a man named Dr. Kennedy. And he said, if my experience is anything that can be learned from, that when we die, we do not die alone as you would fear, but we die into an ocean of love. And so, death is not to be feared, that's for sure. In fact, death is, in fact, the great engine of spiritual development. And, we suffer in this life. There's no question about it. But death itself is not to be feared. That's a time for us to rest. And it's a shame that there's, all these different divisions, as you pointed out in the beginning, between deeply religious Christians, for example, and mediums and such as that. And yet they all believe the same thing, which is that we're looking for love in this life, and we're looking for faith, and we're looking for that connection with what people like kids, because kids just say it's God, so we're looking for that connection with God, and it really doesn't, I think, matter what label people put on it, and then we just start fighting among each other. Well, you say it's this, and you say it's that,
Well, I
and we
drowned
miss
when
the
I
point.
was 5, and I didn't remember this until after my second NDE. And it was a couple months later, and I was just looking at the night sky, and I got relaxed in the stars, and I just kind of like gave things over to God that was going on. And um, all of a sudden I saw my drowning, like this big movie screen in the sky. And so I called my mom the next day. I was like, did I drown when I was little? I was like, yeah, you did. How do you remember that? And but I remember that as, I left my body, went above the pond, and it was all out of body. It wasn't the tunnel and the heaven experience like with my second one. And they showed me, I say they, but I was shown my family didn't love me as I'm hovering above the pond. And then a voice clearly said to me, children are sent here to be loved. That is why God sends them here. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm this 5-year-old little spunky thing. And I'm like, wait a minute. You just show me, my family don't love me. And then you tell me that's why God sends him here and sends us here. And that's not fair. And a strong sense of injustice grew in me that I believe I still have to this day. And I think I was just meant to have that. Why are kids unloved? Why are kids unwanted? That is just a fire that, brews in me of the injustice towards children.
So that's what I mean. It sounds so like it sounds like a a Facebook bumper sticker. We're here to learn lessons of love. But you put your finger on, what you're obviously here to learn. That's so it's not an easy lesson. Why do children sometimes grow up unloved? And what are they supposed to learn from that? And why would a just God let children grow up that way?
I think
And
we're to
yet,
learn to not just love our own blood, to love everyone that needs love, and to watch for people that need love, because they won't always come out and tell you, hey, I need love over here. So to watch the signs of a child that's hungry, a child that looks abused, a child that looks lost, or, a child just needs a little encouragement. Just to open up people's eyes to that instead of just focus on, okay, my kids have everything. They have the most, they're the most popular. They have the most, well, what about the little kids right there on the street when you call your kids in to eat? Do they have anything to eat at home? Just simple as that.
so what a beautiful lesson. And and that's of course the lesson that Jesus Christ told us. That that when we feed the hungry, when we clothe the poor, when
The
we
least
visit people
among
in
us.
prison,
Mhm.
that that's the work that brings us closer to God.
Yeah. And, the
So
visiting
I'm
people in prison, that's big because my youngest adopted son, he's in jail right now. And, it happens to all of us. None of us have a clean slate. None of us are perfect. And our family, I was honest about my son, and because I don't want people thinking, oh, look at Peggy, isn't she perfect? She adopted all those kids, she fostered those kids, and she just no, I want them to know this is, the drug abuse this generation's facing. It's a it's a real problem. You know, they got their kids removed and then they signed him over to the state, and he got out of 2 felonies by going and signing over to get the treatment, and then he violated his probation, and so now he's looking at, you know, serving his felonies, and sometimes you just gotta love him
Right.
enough to walk away.
Well, Peggy, let me just challenge you a little bit then,
Okay.
because you're looking at this as you're saying, you know, I'm not perfect, as if people are supposed to be perfect, and we want to have that public persona of being perfect. And yet, my son, uh, you know, but the Tibetan monks 1500 years ago, they would say that after they've lived a life of piety and after they've raised their spiritual level greater height, they would say, "Oh, I'm ready to come back as a criminal," because there's lessons that can only be learned being addicted to drugs. There's lessons that only can be learned by being a bad person.
Or being
By
accused of something
you know,
you didn't do. To have all
yeah,
the society treat you in a way for something you didn't do, you're given an identity that you didn't deserve.
yeah.
And, you
I
know,
understand that
anybody
one
wants to go back and
very
watch the last
intently.
time I interviewed, you would have to go there. But, the last interview was
Yeah,
amazing because we got
yeah.
really real on that. No, I didn't intend to, you know, where we went
I
there.
know. I remember.
And we've been down that road, but
So we have to keep this in mind. This is a school, and we're here to learn lessons of love. And maybe the people that we look down on, the drug addict, the criminal, the person who's made some terrible mistake, killed somebody in a bar fight, or what have you. Maybe those are people who are in the PhD program. Maybe those are people, because let's face it, living an ordinary life is not that difficult. There's
yeah,
not terrible lessons to
I,
learn when you're
yeah.
always successful, when
Mhm.
everything just comes easy
They're
for
not very deep, I've noticed. People that have had a very easy life are not very deep individuals to have a conversation with.
you. Well, I know that from my own life because, as we talked about before, Peggy, my life was only one of success.
Mhm.
You know, it was just award after award and top of my class. And, I applied to medical school. Sure, I got into Johns Hopkins, you know, and it's just, and I had great kids and a great wife. And then everything came to a screeching halt when, I was accused of a crime that I didn't commit. But I had to, I had to admit that I wasn't innocent. I created the environment that this bad thing happened to me. That and only when I started to do that, did things change. And I learned more in the last 10 years of my life than I learned in the first 55 years, in which it was just success after success after success. I was a shallow person. I hadn't learned a thing.
Yeah. Well, mine's been see, it's 24, 23 years since my aha moment like that, because I had only known success. I was, child abuse investigator, 60 therapeutic foster kids, adopted 10. I was accepted to law school. So we left Ohio and went to Michigan, Lansing, Michigan. Okay, this was not the place for me to move. I live in the middle of a cow field and a forest. I went to Lansing, Michigan, and didn't know what I was getting into. And our adopted kids didn't respond well, and I did not think how this would affect them. Our family was so bonded, doing well. I'd always had success. I knew this would just be one more thing. And one of them got a call from the biological mother, and she said to lie about us. So that's what they did. They went to school and lied. I ended up with Children's Services knocking on my door the day I got my book list to start law school. And they ended
Uh,
up removing our 9 adopted children, me. And you talk
yeah,
about looking in the mirror. Who are you? I don't have the identity I always had because I'm seeing myself through the lies people are saying about me. They said we lined our kids up like we were in the military. My husband was never in the military because one of them got a paddling for running down the street instead of getting a school bus. I woke my husband up and I said, he just made his paddle as a joke. And I said, here, paddle. He's like, I never paddled a kid before. I said, we just tap him on the butt. In Ohio, it was still illegal to paddle kids in school, so it wasn't nothing to me. And they're now adopted. We can give them a little spank, just enough, tap her. He tapped her real light is all it was. We didn't know in Michigan. It don't matter if it's one light tap or not. It's child abuse to use an object to spank a child. And they come in to recycle our kids back in the system because we found out that we didn't know this till years later. The caseworkers, and now mind you, this was December 7th, right after 9/11, which everything's up in the air, everybody's like anxious anyway. And they anyway, they had that all the caseworkers got a bonus for each kid they removed. And then, so there's 9 kids at Christmas time. That's a heck of a check. And then with the 9 kids, to get them back in this, to be adopted out again, they were going to get more money. So we fought and fought, and we got our kids back in 2 months. They sent us to parenting class.
I understand this whole story.
Yeah, I'm sitting there in parenting class, right? I'm in a parenting class, and we're not even allowed to go to parenting class together, me and my husband. And I'm so devastated. And so finally, after a few of these classes, I opened my mouth and I'm surrounded by drug addicts and alcoholics, in this class. And finally, I just like blurt out and just told our story. And the guy, the trainer, he says, I'm going to look into your case. The next time I went back to parenting class, he said, this is you and your husband's last class. He says, I looked into your case. You guys were done wrong. He said, you should be teaching this class instead of me. And he says, you guys aren't coming back here. So, everything got found out, but you had to go through that process. But still, I had to come home because I can't function now. This tragedy just happened to me. I'm not going to stay here and just go to law school after this, right? I couldn't start law school because my kids was in foster care. Who could just do that? And so we come home. And so everybody knows, right? Oh, her kids, whisper, live in a small community. Her kids were removed in Michigan and she came back home and she didn't go to law school. And so the looks from the teachers at our school here, the small community, and I just couldn't even show my face because I knew what people thought. And so then we now have a child that likes to lie because she got the control and she thought that she would still get back with biological mother. And so it's 25 years. I'm still traumatized. 25 years. I'm still, because the kids just kept causing problems because they saw they could work the system every time they got grounded. And it just got to be, I will probably be traumatized till the day I die. And that was just,
I want to go out on a limb here and just I want to just share with you. I hear that you're traumatized, and as a pediatrician, I unfortunately saw a lot of these kinds of, unfortunately, Child Protective Services often destroys homes, um, and I mean and they have a hard job. I mean, it's hard to sort out, who's telling the truth and who isn't. Um, but I think that, even if someone with CPS was on the show with us, they would acknowledge that it's a broken system. But when I heard you talking, see, just in my own life, I thought I was a good person because everybody was praising me. And everybody said, wow, you're the great Dr. Morse. You just won this award. You just won that award. You just, you were first in your class. You got good grades. Then, when, I was accused of a crime, by a mixed up child who,
right.
who didn't, who has recanted now, but then I thought I was a bad person because everybody, was, I was all over the internet and you heard what he did and he treated, did that terrible thing and, this, that, and the other. But then at the end of the day, I had to learn, what did I think about myself? And Pegi, I hear that in you, that you've also, from these experiences, that you've learned, but who that you know who you are. Because when you talked earlier about when you looked in the mirror, and that's when I felt that I'd learned my lesson of love. That's when I finally felt peace, is when I realized, hey, wait a minute. I know the person that I am. And some people who don't know me think I'm great, and other people who don't know me think I'm terrible. And yet, the person who knows me the best, myself, I have to stop listening to all these people around
Mhm.
me. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have the life experiences that I had. And this inner confidence that you have, and I see that, that inner glow that you have, it couldn't have happened to you unless you also had to struggle with
Yeah.
people's various
Because, yeah,
opinions.
when I worked at Children's Services in this county, they hated me because I got them in a lot of trouble, a lot of corruption and stuff they were doing. So this was their payback time now. When I come back from Michigan and my little girl wants to say, I don't want to go home because I'm mad. Abuse, removal, permanent custody in a month. It was payback time. Payback. And we even 2 years ago, we went to they called us to get custody of our grandchildren. Well, our county here called that county and had some opinions about us. Therefore, we had to spend thousands of dollars in courts and appeals trying to get our grandkids and still didn't get them. So those lies that little girl told continues all these years later. It's like, how do you heal from a trauma when it keeps affecting you and everything you do? Our priest asked us years ago for me to be a teacher at the Catholic school when I thought, is something going to show up from Michigan? So I worked at CPS after that in West Virginia after this happened in Michigan. I was honest with them. I said, listen, this happened to us. And I'm telling you, I will not, I want to work at CPS again, but I have a new attitude and I will never remove a child because I said to knock on the door, to be on this side of the door as a caseworker is a whole lot different to be on the other side of the door and open the door. And they come in and say they're going to take your children. I had to sit and think, did I do that to people? I would think back at my cases. Was I right in that removal when I was a caseworker? Did I hurt people like this? And then it just blew up. I got the education I could have never got if I went to law school. This gave me the education
Well,
God
that's
wanted
for
me to
sure.
have, was to see what
Yeah.
damage we're really doing. Because I went to law school, I wanted to be a juvenile judge. If I would have done that, I would be removing kids every day. And I'm so glad that I didn't, because now I
Well,
know the harm.
yeah, I have two things that I want to just briefly say that there's an enormous amount of research that's been done on whether, you know, on just the issue you're raising. Because the question is, should you take a child out of a home that's dysfunctional, that has, a lot of, you know, domestic violence and things like that going on, but it's also a loving home and it's also functional in some way. And the only alternative is putting a child in a foster care system, which is certainly broken.
Mhm.
And so a lot of research has looked into this, and it is an open question now whether it is worthwhile, at least for the great majority of children. Obviously, if a child's getting their arm broken, or I mean, some kind of severe abuse, or has obviously pathological parents, that child needs to be removed. But there's a large gray area that research suggests that we are removing too many children from them.
Yeah, and our
But I
grandchildren,
wanted to,
that they needed to be removed. We reported for years they needed removed, and they wouldn't, and they wouldn't, and finally they did. But there's just, if I've come to think of foster care as, even though I had 60 therapeutic foster kids, but now, like I've seen everything full circle, I see it as back in the slave days when they would take the slave children and auction them off. And they take the kids and separate them from the parents and their siblings. Now you go live in this farm. And it's really no different because those kids will be good and behave. But when these foster kids, get to be teenagers, they start to realize what happened here. And they start to realize they went back with mom and dad, even if there was a lot of abuse or drugs or whatever. It doesn't matter if you have a nice home and a swimming pool, that's mom and dad you took me from. And that runs deep. That's like somebody taking you out of coming to your door right now, taking you out of your house and say, that's no longer your wife. This is no longer your house. This is your wife and this is your house. That's exactly what they're doing.
I'm reunited with my daughter now. I sort of feel like Job.
Yeah.
I got this big grant from the Bigelow Foundation, which is probably the largest grant that I've had. I'm reunited with my daughter now, and what you said, you have no, well, I'm sure you do know how true it is, but now it's starting to surface, and she's starting to be able to share with me what happened to her when she was in foster care. And it does it makes me sick. But I want to tell you something else that's helped me.
Okay.
This is what just helped me, and maybe it'll help you. See, there used to be a time going back 40, 50 years ago where children were never believed. And
Right.
I have met many people, adults now, when I tell my story to adults and they share with me, what they've had, I've I've had long conversations with many adults who've said, you know, but I was abused as a child and no one would listen. And I would run across the street to the neighbor's house and I would say, my dad is beating my mom. Please, please help us. And the police would come, take the child back to the home. And it was, and then we sort of pendulum then went the other way. And it was assumed,
Yes.
oh no, well, children never lie.
Right.
It went from never believing a child to well to always believing. And fortunately, when you reinforce children for lying, if they get a lot of power from telling their lies, uh, then they're going to you've just taught them to lie more.
Mhm.
But nevertheless, that's them learning their lessons of love. And at the end of life, they're going to get that same hug from God. You know, so we have to keep that in mind. And there's people that believe, I kind of believe this, that we decide these things before we're born, that we actually get together,
I'll tell you the
with
truth.
people who say,
I'll tell you the
you know,
truth. The morning I got my book list for law school, my husband and I, before we got the knock on the door after school that day, my husband and I was at the mall, started doing some Christmas shopping. And all of a sudden, I'll never forget, this voice come to me with the food court and it said, remember, you asked for this. And I didn't think about that till years later. I'm like, oh my gosh. Because I was secretly praying. I was scared to go to law school. I was praying something would happen that I could save face. Well, that certainly wasn't saving face. That I could save face and not go to law school because I wanted to go back home. Because 9/11 happened. My son re-enlisted in the army because of 9/11. I was scared to death, worried about him. And the kids was acting up there. Or home life wasn't like it was here because the kids didn't act up. We were just a big happy family. They wanted to, where we lived resembled too much where they come from, the city life, the people next door to us, and they're into drugs and the drug dealers on the street corners. And why can't I run with these boys and have sex like these girls are doing? But we didn't have that here in the country. We were just a happy family. I mean, if they wanted to run, they was in the forest or there's a cow field. And I didn't take all that into consideration. I take that responsibility. Like I didn't have a crystal ball and see all these things in the future that and I was able to go for a year and then come back home and go to law school down here. But that just uprooted the kids and uprooted their sense of security and everything, but just by having the move and then the mom on there. But yeah, I did. So a voice very clearly said, remember, you asked for this. And I thought later, like, but I said save face. I wanted to save face because, we moved the family up there, got the kids in law school. My husband got a job in Detroit and I was about to start to law school. And I was like, I wanted to just go home, but like, I would like everybody to know that I like chickened out. And then this thing happened. I'm like, well, I wanted to save face, but I learned a lot. And I can finally say after all these years, I'm glad it happened. And I could never imagine saying that before. But I'm glad it happened because I can see things more openly now.
You can only learn these lessons by actually living life, by making mistakes, doing bad stuff, not having a crystal ball, and not, the unintentional consequences of our well-meaning actions, or when we get angry, and lash out, or act stupid. We can't learn these lessons by reading books or watching movies.
Yeah.
We have to actually be here in the arena.
Yeah. And our
And
youngest
that's what
adopted
this
son,
is.
everything he was doing was like, why don't he ever get caught? Why don't he ever get caught? And then when he would get caught, they wouldn't keep him. I mean, he got the 2 felonies. They let him go within an hour. And like, how does that happen? He got caught with a gun and with meth, a loaded gun in his car, and they just let him go in an hour. Like he kept getting off. He's such a charmer. He's a little, I forget the name of that little psycho guy I'm trying to think of. Ted Bundy. He's like a Ted Bundy. He's so charming. He's so cute. He's so clever. And he wraps people around his little fingers. And I mean, yeah, he did it when we got him when he was 4. We loved him so much. He was so spoiled. And all the girls was always mad because I like, why do you spoil him so much? Like, because I have 3 boys, then my husband's 2 daughters, then our adopted 9 adopted, and then they're all girls. So there's 3 boys, 10 girls, and then the little boy. So my husband was on the road all the time working. So he didn't really have a dad home all the time. He was surrounded by girls spoiling him. And so now he wants women he'll be 30 in November. He wants women to cater to him like we all did, you know, tell you a little lie and I get all this stuff. Women after
How's he
women,
doing
5 at
otherwise? How,
once.
how is he doing?
Um, he's in jail. He he has a trial. He had a pre-trial yesterday for the domestic. He told me on the phone the earliest he can get out is the 12th. And he don't know if he'll get out then, but he has a trial on the 20th on a disorderly. And he has a no bond on the felony probation violation. So, but we're hoping that he goes to jail so he has time to have a consequence. Because that's the only thing we can
I
think of
know
might
many
help him.
people. I know many people who told me that the best thing that ever happened to them was that they went to prison. That was the only thing that took. I know many people who told me that they'd be dead if they hadn't finally been caught and went to prison.
I'm
And
concerned he's going to
that's
hurt
why
somebody else.
when I work with the ex-incarcerated, when I work with gentlemen, have been in prison, the thing that we work on is the meditation, the yoga, spiritual understandings, so that and that's what leads to transformation, and it can happen with your son too. And I would never give up on him. And I know that you're not the type that
I,
ever would
I
anyway. But
have suspicions, and he's denied it because the priest took him every Sunday with him, wouldn't take the other older boys, just my son, to visit the sick and all these things. And it went on and on. And then one day that priest showed up and he asked if our son could spend the night with him and his family at Thanksgiving. No, and this is weird. And then that priest got moved to another diocese a few hours away, and he showed up at our kids' school. The girls come home and told me, said, Mom, Father so-and-so, it was at our school today, said he wasn't allowed to see Josh. So then he made up just excuse to us girls. So we know he didn't want to see us. And I was like, Josh, did anything ever happen between you and this priest? No. Well, then that priest, girls no more told me the priest was there. We got to knock on our door. It's our priest. We hadn't seen this guy in like a year. And he says, here's a pamphlet of my church, and here's a pamphlet of the Catholic school, because he's always principal of Catholic schools. And your son's moving in with me. I found a family for him to live with because I'm not allowed to have him live with me. So I have a family that's going to say he's living with them, but really is going to live with him. And I'm like, I had a case of sexual abuse by, a deacon at the Catholic Church, and I know these things happen. And what's going on here? And then he just got up out of my dining room and went in my son's bedroom. My son was in there changing his shirt, didn't have a shirt on. And I walk in, and here's this priest rubbing his shoulders. Oh, you've been working out. Okay, it was all freaky. So I'm always wondered, did he do something to my son to make him the way he is? And he's just not telling us, like it'd be embarrassing because it's, a male thing. But he's
And
always
so
said
often,
no.
everybody is dealing with something.
He's doing
Everybody has
something
something that they're struggling with.
because the priestess
And the
don't
other
do
thing,
that.
the other thing to remember with your son, it applies to my son too, who is doing great now, um, uh, is the male brain, amazingly enough, does not mature until age 27. So the final reorganization for men doesn't occur until age 27. And so there's many troubled teenagers and young adults who suddenly turn the corner when they get to be 27, 28, 30.
Our oldest boys
Uh,
never caused us a day of trouble. The girls weren't even in legal. Nobody's been in legal trouble in our family. So this little guy. But what we're talking about, that as far as the mediums, I don't know about mediums. I'm not a medium, but I've had a lot of spiritual experiences. And one thing I was going to tell you is when I drowned when I was little, I was going down the highway and there's two boys walking carrying fishing poles and I'm talking to them. Hey, where you going? What you doing? What you doing? And one of them started like telepathically telling me, oh, we're running late. We've been fishing. Gotta get home. And I often look back at that and thought, how many times I wonder, do we get communications and we're like, who are we talking to? We're just missing it. These thoughts come in, like, where did that come from? And so many times we hear people say, without even thinking about it, something just told me, to either not trust that guy or not turn down that road or something. We just say it without even realizing, is this some kind of spiritual, spirit coming in and talking to us and helping us? Because
that's what we learned from our study. First of all, I want to tell your watchers, uh, your audience, we did not ask our mediums questions. We asked them numbers. We took the questions that we had, which were, which were not really to communicate with a dead person, but they were questions of the nature of everything we've talked about here. You know, what is spiritual progress? Why are all these things happening? Why does the sort of struggles that your son is going through, why did that happen? Um, but we didn't ask him these things as questions. We asked him numbers. And sometimes one of the mediums contacted an entity, the I am, one of the oldest entities that there is. And she contacted the I am, and she said, I don't know the question. And the I am said, but I do, because of course, they would know what number we assigned to a question. But what we learned really was what we learned from the near death experience is that the spirit world is all around us and it works with us on this very personal level. And rarely, I'll give you an example of how the spirit world seems to work. Um, this gentleman, he was in a motorcycle accident and he lost his arm uh, and cartwheeled and ended up in a pool of water and he would have drowned. The spirit world did not act to stop that accident. The spirit world didn't act in any way to save him from that. What the spirit world did was it encouraged a small group of children that they usually played in one park, but they just sort of, like you're saying, they just got this idea, today, why don't we go play over there? And sure enough, they went and played over there. So they were in the right place at the right time to see the accident, to call for help, so that one of them could go over and lift his head out of the water so, he didn't drown. And that's the way that the spirit world is helping us, exactly the way you described, in
I'm
these
trying.
very subtle ways that we often don't even think are spiritual.
I'm trying to think of the name of the movie. I can't think. It was a true story. And boys are playing on ice and one falls through and drowns. It's called Breakthrough. And uh, the fire department comes, a guy calls and sees the boys out there, he calls the fire department. And this one guy, God tells him something. This guy's an atheist. And he tells him, he thought somebody else, he thought the captain or something told him. And he later told him, hey, well, you told me to go back down and get him. He's like, what are you talking about? I didn't say that. And then at the end of the movie, he realizes that was God, even though he's an atheist. And it makes you wonder, was this all just happened for this guy that's a fireman? You know, the whole church prayed for the boy and stuff, and they brought him back to life, and he wasn't supposed to make it because like brain dead and stuff, and then he ended up being okay. And it just makes you think so much that happens, like what happened to me in Michigan and what happened to you, and you know, the other traumas people's had. When we have the hindsight and we can look back and say, I can see why God did that. I can see where the spirits worked in this. And we
And
can't
there's
see
a
it then at the time. And you say about the faith, where we just have to have faith, you know, thy will be done. Like, God, I don't know why you're doing this, but I know you know why you're doing it.
Where's one of my favorite songs that I'm just blocking on the singer's name now, but she sings, what if our God, gives us our tears? What if it's tears? You know, we want good things to happen, and we pray for good things to happen. But what if the miracles that come to our life come through the tears? And certainly, that's what I've learned in my own life. And I think it's extremely reassuring to know that this world, when we die, then we enter into that unconditional. I mean, an unconditional love. Nazi prison guards describe getting unconditional love when they die. I mean, that's what unconditional love means. So without conditions, that. So no matter what you're going through, no matter how hard you're struggling, is when we're going to get an attaboy, we're going to get a girl, and we're going to get that big hug from God.
Yeah, well,
So often we have to pay attention and we have to be aware, because like what you're saying, it could be anybody that can give us a message. I remember I talked to this one man, and as a young boy, I interviewed the children of my study at Seattle Children's Hospital. I interviewed them all 20 years later because I wanted to see what they learned from having a near-death experience so young. And so I asked this young man, and I said, "So, what did you learn?" And he said, "I learned that my life is very important, and that I have a very important reason, for my life."
mhm.
And I was younger then. And I was still filled with I'm the great Dr. Morse. I'm like, okay, so tell me, so what is it? Thinking he was going to say, I'm going to invent the cure for cancer or something like that. And he really humbled me. And he looked at me and he said, you know something? I don't think I'll ever know what my life is for. Maybe I'll walk across and that'll make a car stop so it doesn't hit me. And maybe because that happened, that'll keep that car from killing somebody else. And I'll never know how important my life was. But I know from my near death experience that my life is important. And so that's we're gonna all learn that when we die.
I want to
It, it,
say,
it,
in all sincerity, you're still the great Dr. Morse. You're
all
still the
right.
great. You never was not the great Dr. Morse. You had a bad thing happen. You're still the great Dr. Morse. And look what you're doing now and what you did for the guys when you got out of prison. You were helping the guys in prison. I mean, you still had that calling. It don't stop our
Absolutely.
calling, no matter what happens. And I think
Yeah.
that's the sign of a success is when no matter what happens, how horrible, you come out of the ashes and you create art. You create something wonderful out of it.
Well, I feel like the great Dr. Morse. So when I look in the mirror and I'm proud of myself
In a new way.
and that I know I did my best, even granted, that I did this that led to that bad thing and that I caused this terrible toxic environment, which then caused the little girl to want to lie about me because she didn't know any other way to, you know, to solve her problems.
That
And I
little
certainly
girl,
didn't, you
yeah,
know,
that little girl did that to me. She now says, I did what I had to do at the time.
exactly. Yeah.
That's not an apology that I would like, but that's what she said. But she's got three teenage girls and she has taken in her other sister's three drug addicted babies. She has six kids. So I feel like I must be a role model because she's doing what I did.
And so you learn the power of forgiveness.
Yeah, because she was
And
a
people
kid.
often forget that we forgive for ourselves. The person who's done something else, they don't benefit whether we forgive or not. What do they care? you know?
One of our other adopted girls, she heard about my book and she called her sister in Alaska and asked her to send her copy. But in the meantime, before she even got a copy, even read it, she made me a bad book review and said something like, I don't know what she said, but I know why she did it. She was so bad. She assumed that I wrote bad things about her in my book. I did not write bad things, and I don't say bad things about my adopted kids. You know what I mean? The things they did because they were kids. They were kids. And I'm not going to have anybody knowing the horrible things they did in my home because they were kids. And I mean, it's just, I'm not going to shame them. I don't want them to carry around shame, people to know the things they did and them have to live with that when they were kids. So no, I didn't put any of that stuff. I have video of some of the stuff they did, but
I could hug you. I wish I could hug you through this Zoom. I wish I could actually Zoom to you because see, I I felt free when I realized just what you just said. Then I said, wait a minute, there's a 13-year-old girl.
yeah,
I mean, by definition,
yeah.
she's a child. I mean, I'm the adult. You know, we're all the adults. We can't blame a child
And you
for
were
things that
done
happen.
wrong the same reason I was done wrong because of who we were. We were made
That,
an example of because of who we were,
well, that's unfortunately true.
you
But
know?
you know,
They made a good
it's
story, you, the doctor and near-death experiences, and then this story, it made big headlines, it sold papers. And I'm sure might have been some Christians behind it that didn't like the near-death experience stuff. And like, oh yeah, let's get this guy, let's make him look bad because we don't like his research. Where I was in the newspapers when I was investigator for a whistleblower on the county and how the truth on child protection stuff they were doing. They frame people. They frame people and they let others go that done far worse than what they were framing for or accused of. And I was honest and I brought that out. And now when I come back home, it's payback time for and I know stuff on them. And if they could discredit me, if they could make sure nobody ever believe what I say about them again, because I know way more than it was ever told. And so yeah, we were
Peggy,
made an example of.
you know from your near-death experiences and your life experiences that at some point you've got to just let go of it. And that's the difference between being able to die and grow and become bitter and withered.
Yeah,
And
yeah. But like I
you
say,
know,
just 2 years ago, this was held against me on our getting custody of our grandkids. And
yeah,
then we went through all these lawyers, we filed appeal. Our lawyers like, oh my gosh, you didn't get due process. They didn't give you your hearing. Children's Services refusing to do our home study. The judge ordered it twice, wouldn't do our home study. It was pure prejudice. And Like, just let me have my day in court, you know. I mean, I was in contact with the governor's office. I helped with, you know, my husband and I testifying, the governor's office says, you realize you help change the system because of people like you that testify these child welfare forums. And you're one of the first ones to use this family, I forget what they call it, something, a budsman. And I thought, okay, great. This is meant to work. It didn't work. It's a system. They're getting too much money for these kids to stop this
What
business.
courage you've had, though. You
Huh?
know, what courage you've had.
I called the
And
governor's office one day and I said, because I watched the Sound of Freedom movie, the Angel Studios put out about human trafficking, and news started coming out about how Ohio is one of the worst, and how the kids that get out of foster care become the traffickers and the ones being trafficked. And so I called him up and a governor's office, like, do you, of course I can get to speak to the governor, you know, his people. And I said, tell the governor, I said, to stop contributing to the delinquency of minors and start giving families opportunity to get these kids instead of being put in foster care. Because you're taking away these kids' roots. When they turn 18, they got nothing. They got nobody. And so they're out here on the streets prostituting and stuff. And so later I got a call back and someone said, did you just call and say this and this? I said, yes, I did. And he's okay, we'll give the information to the governor. I said, thank you. I thought, put me in cuffs if you want for saying it. I don't care. You get to the point where,
oh,
and so, yeah, I'm supposed to
that's,
forgive. I'm supposed to be over it, but I don't think so because I'm still trying to speak out.
I'm not really saying, I don't really see it like that. I hear that you have forgiven, but that doesn't
Yeah, the
mean you
kids.
don't struggle for justice.
Yeah, I forgive the kid. I
No,
don't forgive the kids. I mean, that's a no-brainer,
exactly.
but the
But then,
system is
but
wrong.
then I mean, just like, I've devoted my efforts into preventing recidivism and to try to think, I mean, you know, 75% of prisoners going back to prison again within 3 years, I mean, something is really wrong. So,
They're not getting
and
services. They're not getting counseling in prison either. I was a prison counselor and a maximum women's security. And the counseling, huh, I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. What do I know about psychology, you know?
forgiveness is for ourselves, but that doesn't mean you don't still fight for justice.
Right.
It's not you don't become like just a wimp, just like, oh, okay, I forgive you, everything goes. That's not it. Forgiveness is a strength. Forgiveness comes from a position of strength, and then you use that same strength for justice and to make things better. And at least that's what I've tried to do.
Yeah. And like I say, at 5 years old, I got that strong sense of injustice. Like this isn't
Yeah.
right. And it just stayed with me. Like I was always speaking out about everything. This ain't right. This ain't right. And that's where I like to be actually. I stay out of trouble myself, you know, when you're always like trying to fight for what's right. You're not going out here and do crap that's wrong. So you try to be
All
a
right.
role
Well,
model.
amazingly enough, I'm going to bring this back to my book now.
Thank you.
I am. Um, Amazingly enough, we have talked about my book. We have talked about exactly what is in my book. And, my book is it's called An Urgent Message to Humanity. But the message is all the things that we are talking about now is, to start to have awareness that we're in a spiritual reality, to start to learn the power of forgiveness, that you're not weak because you forgive, but you're strong when you forgive. And the learning to find yourself and the learning to fight for justice.
The
And that's the
society is
kind
in
of things
trouble.
that we learned. And that's what, well, the first Bigelow question is, has mankind failed to spiritually progress? In our 19 mediums, every single one of them said, yeah, you bet. But then they also said, but what does progress mean?
Mhm.
That progress doesn't just mean you're just going to be better, but it comes and it goes. And out of war, comes then a greater peace and a greater understanding.
When a 14-year-old walks into a school like last week, I mean, how many times, we've all asked this question, how many times is going to happen before we do something? What are we going to do? Like, how do we do it? We, the people, how do we even form together to even begin to say, how are we going to change things? Because obviously our government's not going to. Obviously, our government is completely falling apart. So it's going to be we, the people, but we have no way of forming together, to say, okay, let's all do this and let's all do that, because we're all fighting on opposite ends of right and wrong.
And that's what we learn from the spirit world. We learn from the spirit world that we need to learn to love, or we may well face self-fiction. And that I talked about this place as a school, but if we burn the school down, there's not, and the spirit world really sort of, they came across as loving parents. And when you see a child learning to walk and they fall down and they fall down and they fall down, they have to learn to get up themselves. And the spirit world can't be constantly intervening. And like the example I gave you with the motorcycle, they can't prevent every bad thing that's going to happen. Frankly, it didn't sound like they try to prevent bad things from happening.
That
What
guy
they're
that was,
trying to do
go ahead, I'm
is to
sorry.
help us learn. But if a child is starting to walk off a cliff, then they've got to intervene. And we're at that point now where it appears that we're ready to walk off a cliff.
Yeah. That
Anyway,
Kardec, is
we
that his
got a lot to
name?
talk about for next time, Peggy. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. That Kardec, am I saying his name right? The man you guys,
Alan Kardec. Yeah.
yeah. And like I told you before we started, I seen there was a movie on Netflix called Kardec about him. And I didn't watch the whole thing, but there was one part where he was saying, well, there's spirits all around us. And they're like, what? Spirits all around us? Like, that was such a crazy idea. And I was like, if there's anything I know from my life, is exactly that spirits are always all around us. And if we can learn to listen to them, it can save our life, the life of our family, life of strangers. And it's just a matter of learning to listen and not go, oh, that's just crazy. Or what was that? Follow through. It don't hurt.
You told me you just skimmed my book, but actually, you could have written it. That's exactly what we learned. Is we have to learn to listen. You have to learn to be able to tell when you hear that fainting of an angel. And we have to learn to push our fears away and our anxieties away. Our thoughts are born out of hate, our anxiety, our anger. That's not the fainting of an angel. So beautifully said, Peggy. That's I don't want to take up any more of your time. I think
Okay. Okay.
we've we, but I sure want to come on your show again.
Okay. Well, you just send me
So
email anytime you want, and I'll put the link to the new book in your description. I
thank
wrote
you very
down. Tell me the
much.
name of that
I,
again.
I, I feel like I feel like you could have written our book.
Oh, well, like I say, I skimmed over it and I thought this stuff is just no brainer. It's just the way it
For
is.
someone who's had a near-death experience, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, for the ordinary person struggling with the meaning of life and wondering why bad stuff is happening, even though they're trying as hard as they can, that's the person that needs to hear that that we're surrounded by love, that they're cheering us on, that the faint thing of angels is real, but we have to learn to hear it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you,
All
Melvin.
righty.
And
All right. Thank you so
I'll get
much.
I'll get this sent out to you late tonight.
Oh, great. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Peggy. This is
Uh-huh.
wonderful.
Thank you. It's
Thank you
nice seeing
again.
you again.
I,
I
I
hope I
know
get to meet
I,
you someday and get that hug.
this is like the last one that we did. It actually, it was nothing. It was great. It was nothing like we expected it would be.
That's the way it was the first time too. Like I did not plan on
Exactly.
going anywhere we went the last time. And it was just like
Yeah.
on my heart, I was just being led to, because we had something in common. And though I didn't talk about
Yeah.
mine, I was okay to talk about yours.
All right. I gotta tell you something then, before we sign off. Our last interview, your last interview with me was very hard for me because I feel like I revealed a lot of, ugly stuff about me, about my life. And like I told you, I went to Johns Hopkins. I want, I wanted to be, the winner of awards, you know, and yet it was the people's comments and reactions. And I got emails from people that made me cry, and I
In a good
realized,
way, I
wow,
hope.
oh, in a good way. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Oh, that whole, I thought, right, I thought it'd be flood of trolls. And no, there actually, well, there was a little of it, but very little. But it was mostly people saying, wow, you know, eh, thank you. And
Good.
then shared with me unbelievable stuff.
Something
So,
happens
by,
when we are vulnerable and we
yeah,
go ahead and face our worst fear.
yeah,
And I didn't
absolutely.
intend to go there at all. That was not my intention when I brought you on. Although I will say, before I had you on that time, the last time, someone was at the conference and contacted me, and she's like, "Can you believe it? This Melvin Morse is here. Why is he here? Because blah, blah, blah." And I hated her attitude about you. And so I didn't know much about it. And I just looked a little bit what was going on. And then when I met you, something because of what happened to me in Michigan, it just put you in a very special place in my heart that I felt like led to go there.
And it only led to great things for me, I can tell
Good,
you. The emails and the comments were, I felt I was getting unconditional love in this life. Anyway, I'll let you
good,
go, Peggy.
good. That's
And
amazing.
yeah, we need to get together again soon.
Okay, and I want that hug.
My prayers will be with your husband.
Thank you.
Uh, you know, I'll be talking with my wife, and we'll include you in our daily prayers.
Thank you very much. All right.
You know,
I'll talk to you
my
later.
heart goes out to you. And your adopted son, my son
Joshua,
has gone through similar kinds of things, and he came out of it. I want you to know.
I want to say something real
But
quick. I contacted his victim because it was in the newspaper about the fight they got into. It was at a business and all this. So I got that guy's name. I looked him on Facebook. I messaged him. We've been messaging ever since. And it's kind of filled because Joshua, who'll almost be 30, he started this crap when he was 18, rejecting us and being mean and hateful and doing all these bad things. And this guy, he's 45, so he's my son's age, is my oldest boy's. And I'm like a mother to him now. And and I feel like he's like this replacement son of this son that's doing these bad things. And we have just been talking and talking. I'm helping him through things he's going through in his relationship and different stuff. And he was into where Josh was in his past and trying to give me hope that he'll change. And we've just been really sounding board for each other.
that's why we have to reject bitterness and reject despair. Because, I mean, that cliche, one door closes, another door opens. Actually, it's true. But you have to be vulnerable and you have to be ready to allow yourself to have it.
Yeah.
And you have to, you know, be self-aware.
My son was in his home when he come home from work early and caught him with his girlfriend. And my son choked him and the guy lost consciousness. And so as a mother, I feel responsible if my child hurt someone, even though he's almost 30. It's just the way I feel. And so, you know, but yeah, it's
Well, I would not ever give up on your son because my son is 33 now and I couldn't be prouder of him.
yeah.
And it's just, I think for every parent here will understand what I'm saying right now is for from about age 18 to 25, whenever my son called me, I always knew within a few minutes it was going to be, Dad, I need $50. Dad, I need $100. I haven't had that kind of phone call in 5 years from him.
It makes me
I have
think,
phone calls now,
it makes me
the
think,
last
yeah.
hour.
I hope I get a
It
phone
wouldn't-
call like that. It makes me think of the movie Shack, which is fiction, of course, but
Right.
where
Yeah.
we learn this is how God loves. You know, people say, oh, they're going to go to hell and this and that, but this is God's child. You know, it's still God's
Yeah.
child.
Right.
It's like your
If I
son.
had given up on, you know,
Yeah.
if I'd given up on my son, I would never have the relationship I have with him now.
We can
You know,
walk
if you
away
had
and let him
given up,
face consequences.
if you had given up with your son, you know, then you would never have this beautiful relationship with this older gentleman now. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, you know, well, now I did let my son face his consequences because how else is he going to learn?
Right. Exactly.
But you know, I was always there for him. I was always bailing him out. I was always,
I won't do that.
you know, you know, but but
I text my
I
son
think
and I said,
so.
I hope you go to jail because that's the only
But I
way
think it's
I can think
important
you're
to
going to learn.
understand the difference between those things. We can let them face their consequences, let them learn their lessons, and yet give them the message that we love them unconditionally
Yeah.
and that we'll always be there for them.
Yeah. I want him to go to
Um,
jail because I love him.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I had that conversation with my son once too. All right, Peggy.
Right.
Until next time, it's
Okay.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Bye.